I would be saying to any farmer going buying these calves, I mean, temper your expectations. I mean, it's 2 years before you kill these cattle. God only knows what's going to happen in the meantime in terms of input costs or beef price or whatever is going to happen. So given exorbitant prices of, €600 for 3-week-old calves or anything like that is probably a recipe for disaster, I would say, in the long run, especially if not everything goes your way. At the end of the day, you're buying something that requires a lot of maintenance, a lot of care.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, I'm joined in the first part of Dairy Calf to Beef podcast series by Dairy Calf to Beef manager Alan Dillon to discuss the key performance indicators in a sustainable, profitable dairy beef system. Alan, when we talk about dairy beef profitability, which KPIs really matter the most?
Back to the old reliables, Catherine, on that, we're looking at the quantity of grass that's utilised in graze form. In the 2 seasons, the calf should be alive between the first and the second. Its silage quality is extremely important as well. We're looking for that top quality silage all the time. There's no room for this, I suppose we call it dry cow feed that typically suckler and dairy farmers can get away with for a period of time. And you're looking at the health aspects also. I mean, the biggest problem we often see with these dairy calf beef systems is calves are very susceptible to health knocks, especially in the first 12 months of life. And any knock in that period has a serious impact in terms of the level of profitability that can be achieved through a lack of live weight gain, poorer carcass weight, or increased finishing period in the second season. And look, breed can have a knock-on effect too, but I suppose, look, any breed can leave money. It depends on, I suppose, what you pay for them day one. Are you pricing them at the correct place? And I suppose that dynamic has changed a bit in the last 12 months with beef price rising, where there's a big change in terms of the calf prices that have been given out there. So what people need to know, I suppose, and look at the genetics of the calf and the CBV and the breed and pick their price point correctly.
Based on that, there's a number of factors, Alan. There's not just one that will link directly with profitability.
It's trying to get all these pieces of the jigsaw together can be tricky. Last year, I'd say 2025 was probably a year where it was a little bit easier to achieve, and that, we had a reasonably good spring, went into a nice enough summer, and look, we had a bit of a wet autumn at the end, but, we got a few weeks there in October, so we were able to achieve probably ideal turnout dates. We were able to utilise a lot of grazed grass, and we were also able to harvest silage at probably the optimum times in most scenarios. So it fell into position a lot easier last year than it had in the previous 3 years. And I suppose the price of beef rising was a big help also in that scenario.
How closely, Alan, does age at slaughter link to margin, or what's the sweet spot for a dairy calf to beef system?
In terms of age of slaughter, okay, it's a lot of the farmers, the demonstration farms we're dealing with, you're typically talking, they're aiming to hit around that 21 months for the heifers, and maybe 22 to 24 months for a lot of the bullocks. Now, look, it depends on your system too. If you're a very lightly stocked farm, reducing your age of slaughter isn't actually going to increase profitability. It's actually going to pull it back probably, unless you're actually replacing the animals that were killed at a later stage with a younger animal that's going to utilise the forage and bring more production on the farm. So, we have quite a substantial amount of farmers are still maybe finishing a share of cattle that, 27, 28, 29 months off grass in the third grazing season with lower levels of inputs, and that probably suits them. If they were to pull that back to 22, 23 months of age of slaughter and not buy any extra calves in or any extra stock on the ground, you would see a definite reduction in actual profitability based on, you would be talking a higher level of meal input but a lower level of overall output because you're killing cattle lighter at a younger age. So there's not an exact science to say that just pulling back the age of slaughter increases profitability. It's based on that you replace those animals that would have gone later with a younger calf that can grow again on the farm and increase output. So for any of the guys that we're saying that are stocked up at 140, 150 to 170, 180 organic nitrogen, the higher into things, you're looking at the 21 months to the 20, to 24 months of age, depending on whether bullocks or heifers. But if you're a lighter stock farm, 110, 120 organic nitrogen, where a lot of people are sitting, you're probably still saying a proportion of those stock killed at a later stage is giving you greater grass utilisation and greater live weight gain and heavier cattle, and he's giving you probably a greater level of profitability. So it depends where you're sitting. If you want to push the stocking rate on a bit, you're killing them earlier. If you want to keep it at a lighter stocking rate, probably that later age of slaughter is probably helping.
So very farm specific in that situation, Ellen. I suppose the completion and analysis of the DairyBeef 500 profit monitors is currently underway. Along with some of the listeners, they'll also be completing their profit monitors with their local advisor. What gross margin per head should a well-run DairyBeef system be targeting today?
Yeah, so look, the beef prices that has been the biggest, I suppose, determinant in terms of the level of profitability that we're achieving on these farms in the past 12 months. And we saw a massive increase in beef price last year. We were hitting, from now on, you could save 650 or higher, and it went to nearly 760, 770 base price, which meant a lot of cattle were hitting near €8 as time went by through late spring and for parts of the autumn as well, even. So typically, right, the gross margin stage, which is basically your sales, take off your cost of sales, which is a calf purchase, and take off all your variable costs. So that's your feed, your fertilizer, your contractor, your vet, those type of costs that are directly linked to the animal being alive on the farm. When you work all that out, take off those costs off it, you're talking of gross margins for a well-run, highly stocked system of somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 a hectare. Okay. For lower stock farms, look, you could be still down at maybe 14, 15, 1600, but that's still substantially higher than where these farms were a couple of years ago. The beef prices had a big increase, impact here in terms of the level of profitability on the farms. What we have seen, I suppose, is the fixed costs have started to rise over the past 4 or 5 years. If you go back 5, 6, 7 years ago, typically people would have quoted fixed costs on beef farms as being between 5 to 600 euros per hectare. But that, I suppose, has, I think, moved on dramatically at this stage. If you take the cost of, machinery, buildings, labour, repairs and maintenance, etc., you're talking probably double that now on a lot of the higher stock farms. You're probably talking somewhere between 1,000 and 1,300 euros per hectare for fixed costs. So while they are rising, it is probably a positive enough way to look at it, in that people are able to invest at this stage again in their farms. A lot of these investments that are causing the fixed costs to rise were probably badly needed for a long number of years. If you take, machinery replacement, if you take shed building, handling units, roadways, all these costs that are maybe were being put on the back burner when beef prices were poor, the fact we've got extra cash in the system now, it's allowing farmers to actually reinvest in their farms and make them maybe, a more workable place, with less, I suppose, dangers around in terms of, moving stock, handling stock, better quality machinery that won't break down and is safer to use. It's a positive to look at that money is there to be put into these investments on farm. But I'd be saying, look, if you are doing a profit monitor, there's 2 things to remember this year. It'll show you where you went last year in terms of your profits, and it should be a positive story overall. And the second thing, I suppose, with the amount of farmers that are looking at tax bills this year, is probably no harm to give you an idea of where you might be in terms of what monies you put aside for tax at the end of the year. With the volume of farmers in beef farming that are working part-time and are probably on the high rate of tax anyway with their farm, they could get a bit of a shock at the back end of the year with how much they actually have to pay if they're on the 52% tax rate or 53%, whatever they're paying. So having that bit of cash kept aside to cover that bill at the end of the year is something that would probably want to be factored in at the start of the year.
And that reinvestment in that farm that you mentioned, Alan, that's been very important. I suppose from a day-to-day costs on the dairy beef farms, which costs tend to creep up unnoticed or quietly erode profit in a dairy beef system that you see working with the DairyBeef 500 farms?
Yeah, I suppose if we look at the variable cost side, which, as I said, they're the direct animal-related costs, I would say 2 things can often catch you, and there's probably not much you can do when you're in the throes of it. Meal feeding can be quite high. If your silage quality isn't up to scratch, or your animals are a little bit backward coming into the shed, a bit below target, you can start seeing a huge increase in the volume of meal being fed per head. An extra 200 or 300 kilos of meal required across 60 or 70 heads. You can add it up. You're talking a substantial extra bill there. And when you're in the middle of feeding for killing cattle, there's not much you can do. You have to keep going if your plan is to kill them to when the fat score is adequate. There's no point sending off underfed cattle. So feeding on is something that has to be done, and it's really a lesson for the following year to try and improve your silage quality and try and improve your grazing management, to have cattle on target entering the shed, so that feeding period inside, which is the most expensive period of the older animal's life, is kept to a minimum. And the second one is the vet bills. The vet bills now are something, I suppose, that, if you do get an outbreak or something, or sick calves, or pneumonia, or scour, there's not much you can do when you're in the middle of it, only take it on the chin and try and solve it. But I suppose something people have to do is try and look at the situation, how did it develop on the farm? Why is there scour? Why is there pneumonia problems, etc., developing? Is it a hygiene issue, with regards not enough straw being used, or is there drafts in the shed that need to be blocked off with maybe stock board, or overstocking, or what is it? Look at these angles and see what's causing the problem. Because, as I said, there are two costs, meal and vet, that, if you need to do it, you have to do it on the day. There's no getting out of it. You can't solve it without spending money, but you need to look at why did it happen in the first place? What you need to do the following year and the year after, try and reduce these costs. On the fixed costs, I would say, as I said, the fixed costs are rising. The machinery has gone up a lot. If you're, any reasonable second-hand tractor or anything is costing you about 70 or 80,000 at this stage to buy. There's not much you can do when you buy it if you need it. That's it. But I suppose other things such as repairs and maintenance are rising a lot on farms. Now, look, again, I'm not saying these are bad things. They're probably jobs that needed to be done, but we've seen substantial increases in repairs and maintenance. And that's, as I said, positive, that you're fixing things that need to be fixed, that will maybe save you time and save you labour, and will, make the farm a safer place maybe into the future. So there is a lot of rises coming in costs. As someone said, when the beef price rises, so does the money going out the door. But I suppose I'd say on the last few years, if you take the last few bad years we had, 22, 23 were two bad years. I would say a lot of people peel down the running costs of their farm down to the bare bones. And that's not a good place to be either. Pulling back on fertilizer, or pulling back on P&K applications, or lime applications, or reseeding, drainage. These are all things that if you don't maintain them, you'll run your farm down gradually. And it's going to hit you in the long run. Then your farm will be more unproductive. So it's good to see some of these costs maybe rising in certain scenarios, that they will benefit the farmer in the long run, and make the farm overall in years to come more profitable.
That's great, Alan. I suppose the question on a lot of farmers' minds this spring is, calf purchase price. How much does the calf purchase price influence the lifetime profitability in a dairy beef system?
It's quite substantial. And if you take it on a lot of our farms, it's a case of the stocking rate can have a big factor too. If you're a very lightly stocked farm and you're killing cattle at an older age, you may be only buying in 1.2 or 3 calves to the hectare. So an increase in calf purchase of, €100 or €200 even might only increase or decrease your profitability by, €200 per hectare or thereabouts. But if you're any of the demonstration type farms we're dealing with, where you're talking about 2.3, 2.5 livestock units to the hectare, paying an extra €200 or €300 for a calf can suddenly reduce your profit by 5 to 7, €800 per hectare. It could actually wipe your profit if things went bad in terms of beef price at any stage. So that's one thing people are going to have to maybe reel in a little bit. Their expectations of what this business can leave by overpaying on calves. And we do see, a lot of these calf prices being maybe exaggerated, and I'd say social media has a bit of a problem to play, has a bit of a role to play in that. We do see Marsa put out these, exorbitant calf prices of €700 and €800 per head for them, and often you look at the calves and you see, they're probably born maybe about 3 months ago. They're reared calves at this stage. They're still expensive at that, but I wouldn't expect that calf prices will be too much over last year. They were expensive last spring, and they experienced a big rise compared to the previous 4 or 5 years. But it's hard to tell, but I suppose exporters and farmer sentiment is going to dictate a lot of it. But I would be saying to any farmer going buying these calves, temper your expectations. There's 2 years before you kill these cattle. God only knows what's going to happen in the meantime in terms of input costs or beef price or whatever is going to happen. So, given exorbitant prices of, €600 for 3-week-old calves or anything like that is probably a recipe for disaster, I would say, in the long run, especially if not everything goes your way. Because we do see what happens is that, a lot of these calves don't thrive very well. You do have 10 to 15% of these calves. They mightn't die, all of them, but something goes wrong with them. They might get a touch of pneumonia or a touch of scour or such a summer scour maybe, which was a problem last year. And that can have a severe impact in terms of the actual carcass that goes out the gate at the end of the day, which is what dictates what money you make. So you have to build in all these factors onto the farm before you go too crazy buying these calves. They're a tizzy animal to buy, and look, if they're done right, they can leave money, but I would be holding back a little bit now on paying anything too crazy for these calves because at the end of the day, you're buying something that requires a lot of maintenance, a lot of care. It's 50% dairy genetics in it. Hopefully the bull that's been used is of a high quality to give you a good CBV. But people need to just maybe hold their fire a little bit and not be expecting too much out of the game by overpaying for these calves in the first 3 weeks.
Most definitely, and I suppose from the DairyBeef 500 farmers that you're working with, which changes and improvements did they make that had a major impact that listeners could implement on their farm in 2026?
Well, if we start with, I suppose, the breeding side of the house, maybe, right? That look, you're buying what's in front of you. You don't get to decide on really in most scenarios on what bulls are being used on the cow or the cow type. It's what a dairy farmer has to sell, and they have whatever they have. That's it. But from a beef farmer point of view, I suppose what a lot of our farmers are trying to do is maybe target farms that have use maybe slightly better bulls, and are maybe a good cow type as well. And calves that are getting bee stings and that are being reared in a good environment prior to being moved. So there should be the least amount of trouble, hopefully, in terms of sickness of these calves when they arrive on your farm. And that's one thing they're definitely focusing on is, trying to get a bit of a handle on bull selection that the dairy farmer's using. Is he or she paying attention to the carcass value of the bull that's been used, the beef bull, and to match their cow type, and also that they're giving those calves a little bit of a good start, that they're cared for and they're in good condition when they're leaving. That they're confident enough this calf is going to thrive and turn into a reasonably good animal in 2 years' time. I would say, look, a big investment has been done in terms of soil fertility again in the last 2 years. A lot of lime gone out. A big refocus on P and K, getting that right to make sure that you're growing the correct quality of grass, the correct quantity of grass that's required for your stocking rate, and good quality silage. And then I suppose the stocking rate has gone up on these farms a lot. Quite a number of them are gone into derogation at this stage. And they are at the higher end of things. Luckily, the derogation is there for another 3 years anyway. If there was any wobble to come in the derogation down the line, these farmers may have to reassess their system slightly and maybe look at maybe slaughtering slightly earlier or maybe buying less calves or something like that. That may be something that may need to be looked at. But it's never one single thing that they're going to do that's going to increase profitability in the farms. And we've seen that. We've taken on quite a number of farms, newer farms in the last year on the dairy beef program. And there's a chasm in terms of the profitability between the existing farmers we've had for a long number of years and the newer farmers. And that's a sign of that, when farmers work to a program and work to a plan, and pay attention to detail, it has much greater impact on profitability than any single rise in beef price will. It's about the small details, that getting them right, that every calf is hopefully thriving, or the vast majority, that they're taken through to slaughter at the correct age, the system is in place, and it's about not fooling with the system as well. Because very few of our farmers are going to change what they're doing. They're going to keep doing the same thing by roughly the same number of calves, hopefully at reasonable value, please God, if they can, and try and maybe just eke out a little few extra tweaks in terms of technical performance over the 2 years of the animal's life, that they're finished maybe a little bit earlier at a bit of a higher weight with maybe slightly less meal input or vet input or whatever is needed, and that's what's going to make the difference.
That's great, Alan. And finally, you're organising a dairy beef conference which is taking place next Thursday, the 29th of January in Ballykisteen Hotel in Tipperary. What can listeners expect on the night?
Yeah, we'll have the profit monitors finished by then, Catherine, and we'll give a fairly detailed rundown of where the costs have gone on the farms and what's been the difference between someone that's making a very high net margin versus someone making maybe a more moderate or lower net margin. Nicky Byrne is going to talk a little bit about CBV, and I suppose while CBV is starting to show, I suppose, a lot of positive benefits in terms of the production, in terms of the extra carcass you're getting and the extra performance out of the animals, it's still probably not having a major impact on the average farmer when he's buying his calves. Talking to a lot of dairy farmers lately, they said there isn't very many farmers ever asking them about the CBV, and what level of input they have put in bull selection on their farm. So it's something that we're going to just talk a little bit about to try and show the benefits and show what difference it can actually make in terms of your net profit. We have Chloe Miller. She's a technician in Teagasc, and she's heavily involved in the Teagasc Tipperary calf to beef farm, and in Tipperary. And she'll talk a little bit, I suppose. One thing is the calf purchasing policy they have there. So there's a policy there of they buy only calves of a certain weight, with a certain CBV. And they have a health protocol that they have when buying these calves to ensure that they come and hopefully hit as minimal amount of problems as they can over the rearing period with the calf. And also she'll talk about their pricing structure. So they have a pricing structure which takes the weight of the calf into account and the CBV. And there's a plus or minus paid for the calf in terms of the price. Depending on how good the CBV is or how heavy the calf is. And obviously it brings a negative then if the calf is too light or it's a poor CBV. So she'll outline that and how it's working with the group of farmers that we have. And also then we're going to have a panel discussion with three people that are heavily involved in calf to beef. So Peter O'Hanlon is a dairy calf to beef farmer there. He would have had a very big farm walk there at Kilkenny last back end. He's buying around 200 calves annually and increasing this now to 250 calves as he expands his operation. He's going to talk about his experiences. Jack Spillane is the farm manager of the Tipperary Dairy Calf to Beef Farm, and he's going to outline how, I suppose, they have got on the last 12 months and the last 2 years since they've set up the farm and what they hope to achieve for the year ahead. And then Tommy Cox is an advisor on the Dairy Calf to Beef program, and he's going to give a quick outline, I suppose, of what he's seen in general on farm and where generally the pitfalls are with farmers when they're in a system like this. What's the difference between a good farmer and a bad farmer in terms of the profitability of it and the headaches some might face versus others? Why do some get them and some not? With herd health and performance, etc. So, and there'll be an opportunity for anyone to ask as many questions as they want on the night and get a bit of a feel for the for calf to beef systems, and if it's made, some might say it's for them and some might say it's not.
That's great, Alan. Sounds like a very interesting night on Thursday, the 29th of January in the Ballykisteen Hotel, County Tipperary, kicking off at 7 p.m, and I'll include the details in the podcast text. Thanks very much, Alan.
Thanks very much, Catherine.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Alan for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.